Okay, you probably know by now. The theme we're following is discourses from the Pali Canon, the oldest, most complete collection of writings about the life of the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching, the actual historical Buddha's teaching. The heart of the Pali Canon are a large number of discourses called suttas. Sutta means thread. It's related to our word suture, that anyone in the medical profession will know about. So they're threads because they're connected discourses. They're logical, they're progressive, etc. So they're a thread. And the series is called Thus Have I Heard, because these suttas, most of these suttas start with those words, thus have I heard. The Buddha's teachings, etc., were passed down as an oral tradition for several hundred years before they were ever written down. And it was an important part of the practice of the early practitioners to remember the suttas, learn them by heart and pass them on. So when someone recounted one of those suttas, maybe in an evening, sitting in the square of a village surrounded by an audience, they would start with, thus have I heard. So that's why that's there at the beginning of all of them. This is what I've been told, the Buddha said, and now I'm passing it on to you. Thus have I heard. And tonight, what I'd like to do is talk about two suttas from the collection called the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, in which the Buddha throws some light on a question that can seem to be a problem for some modern-day Buddhists in the West. And that's the question of lifestyle. Okay? What sort of lifestyle should we choose if we are sincere and committed Buddhists in the West? Do we need to become monks or nuns, or the equivalent in our tradition? We don't have actual monks and nuns, but do we need to become monks and nuns, or the equivalent, if we're going to practice seriously? Or on the other hand, can we live a perfectly normal, conventional life, a conventional middle-class life, and still be serious Buddhists? Or can we find a lifestyle that suits us and still really works as a spiritual path with some real cutting edge somewhere in between those two extremes? So what does the Buddha say about this question? And how do we apply what he says to our situation, which is so very, very different to the situation that the Buddha was teaching in? How do we apply it in our tradition, in the Triratna Buddhist community, where we don't have this distinction between monks, nuns on the one hand and lay on the other hand? So in the Buddha's time, there were really only two choices as to lifestyle. It was quite simple. A person either went completely forth from the household life, giving up their old worldly identity, devoting themselves to a spiritual life in a completely radical way, having absolutely no worldly possessions apart from a dirty old robe and a bowl, no responsibilities, no possessions, often sleeping in the open, begging for food, eating whatever they were given. Attractive? Pretty radical. You would have to be a committed person to practice like that. Or else, you had a family and a livelihood with all that entails. With a family to support, you have to find a livelihood and devote yourselves to bringing up a large family because there's no contraception and certainly no welfare state, so you haven't got too many choices. So these were the two alternatives. You could either become what's called a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni on the one hand, which was not the same thing as becoming a monk or a nun in the modern context, much more radical, much more dangerous, much less comfortable. Or else you live as a householder, which seems a much more comfortable and safe option, but with your family and your livelihood taking up an awful lot of your time and your energy and your mental space. Okay, that was the Buddha's time, and that's where the Buddha's teachings were sort of directed towards that dichotomy. But things are very different now. Okay, things are very different now. We have a much wider range of choices, certainly in the West. We can live in a monogamous relationship and choose not to have a family. Or we can limit the size of that family. Or we can choose to have a series of more casual relationships, if that's what we want. We don't have to be celibate to avoid the responsibility of a large family and everything that entails. Which was the only option in the Buddha's time. So there's that fact. And there's also the fact that, well, things must have been pretty hard in the Buddha's time. If you were a farmer, you didn't walk away from your farm and expect to go back to it. Or if you were a trader, you didn't walk away from your trading and expect it to still be there. But, you know, if we're reasonably well educated and able, and if we live in a rich country, as Britain is, and if we haven't fallen for the con of the consumer society, and if we've got a bit of courage, then many of us can earn what we need to live quite easily without it becoming a full-time occupation, actually. We can choose to work part-time, we can spend spells working, and spells when we don't work for money, but instead devote ourselves to practicing more intensely, maybe devoting ourselves to meditation, maybe devoting ourselves to some form of voluntary service within the Sangha as part of our practice of altruism and service. So we've got those options. Okay, in most of the Buddhist world today, that the radical renunciant of the Buddha's time has morphed into a monk or a nun, which is a much more comfortable and safe option. But there's still a big gap in most of the Buddhist world between the monks and nuns on the one hand and the householder followers on the other. It's a really big gap. In most of the Buddhist world, the monks and nuns are seen as the real Buddhists. While the householders are regarded as very much really second-class practitioners. Most householders would not meditate, for example. They wouldn't be taught to meditate. They would not be expected to have a serious meditation practice. They would not be expected to gain insight, for example. They wouldn't be expected to really make much progress. But this split between the full-time monks and nuns and the householders, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make so much sense in the present-day West, where we've got this much broader range of lifestyle options. So for that reason, the Triratna Buddhist community describes itself as neither monk nor lay. Some order members have families, houses and careers. Some have careers but no families. Some live in Buddhist communities. Some order members work for right livelihood businesses or in Buddhist centres, receiving just a very bare level of support, so living a quite simple life. And some people live a really austere monastic life for quite long periods. There's a group of guys currently spending a year-long retreat in a remote valley in the mountains of Spain, mostly in silence. So there's that option as well. Everything from a quite hardcore monastic existence to not. So order members in Triratna, we live a variety of lifestyles and often swap one lifestyle for another. So people will live perhaps a monastic lifestyle for a while and then engage more fully in the world with all the sort of benefits that the period of intense practice brings. So Sangha, actually the founder of our order, he coined an aphorism. He's good at coining aphorisms. He coined an aphorism, lifestyle, commitment is primary, lifestyle is secondary. So, whereas in much of the Buddhist world, adopting a monastic lifestyle is what makes a person a serious Buddhist, in our order, it's a person's commitment that makes them a serious Buddhist. And they can do that effectively in a wide range of lifestyles. But for some people, this choice, this wide range of lifestyles, seems to make the problem of deciding on an appropriate lifestyle even more difficult, actually. Because in the Buddha's time, it was easy. You were either up for it, really up for it, or you lived a householder lifestyle. But now, as often happens, more choice seems to create more confusion, at least for some people. So I've even heard people criticising Triratna movement for being anti-relationship and anti-family, for example, or complaining that to be ordained into the order you have to work in the right livelihood and live in a community. When even the tiniest actual look at what's on the ground would tell people that that's not true, that there are loads and loads of order members living in families, married to each other, married to other people, following careers. There's loads of people ordained who aren't doing those things. But this sort of problem that some people see seems to come about because although lifestyle is secondary and commitment is primary, some lifestyles do make it easier to practice the Dharma. In some lifestyles, we've got more free energy and more free time than others, and a more supportive environment. So, of course, some lifestyles are more supportive than others. So Sangha added to his aphorism, commitment is primary, lifestyle is secondary, but not unimportant. So where do we go with this? What has the Buddha told us that we can perhaps apply to our situation? To explore this a bit, I'd like to tell two stories from suttas in the Pali Canon. And the first story is set in the far distant past, eons ago, I think. And in this story we have two close friends. Gatikara the potter and a young man of more noble birth called Jotipala. And in the town where they were living at that time, there was staying on his wanderings an enlightened renunciant, not a Buddha, but an enlightened person, an arahant, called Kassapa. And Gatikara the potter, he was a committed disciple. He was a committed disciple of Kassapa and a strong supporter. He supported him as well, helped to support him. And one day, Gatikara the potter said to his friend Jotika, the rather more high-born Jotika, let's go and see this Kassapa. Let's go and hear his teaching. And Jotipala said, give over, Gatikara. Why would we bother to go and listen to that boring, scruffy old tramp? What's in it for us? Let's go and have some fun, for heaven's sake. Let's go and have some fun. Gatikara is quite cunning, actually. So there's actually a river. There was a river between where Gatikara and Jotipala were and where Kassapa was staying. So Gatikara said, well, okay, let's go and bathe in the river. The text says, let's take a back scratcher and some soap powder and go and bathe in the river. And of course, Jotipala thinks, well, that's great. Okay, great. Let's go and bathe in the river. So off they go. And when they get there, Gatikara asks again, should we go and see Kassapa? I think you'd really benefit if we went to see Kassapa. Give over, Gatikara, let's bathe in the river. That's what you said we were going to do. So they bathed. And here, I think there's a detail here in this story which I quite like, which is that young men at the time obviously used to wear their hair really long, and they used to pile it up on top of their heads. You can see this in a lot of Buddhist sculptures. That was definitely the fashion at the time. Really long hair piled up in sort of elaborate coifs on the head. So when they bathed, Jotipala let his hair down. Great long hair. And they wash each other and presumably scratch each other's back with a back scratcher. And Jotipala washes his hair. And then Gatikara asks again, should we go and see Kassapa now that we've bathed? And once again, Jotipala says, no, come on, give over. So Gatikara grabs Jotipala by the hair and starts dragging him by his long hair and starts dragging him towards Kassapa. And we're told that Jotipala thought, surely it is wonderful and strange that this potter, Gatikara, who is of lowly birth, should grab hold of my hair when I have just washed it, and to try to drag me by it. Me, who am of much higher birth than him, There must be something important behind this. So apparently he said, do we really have to go and see Kassapa? And Gatikara said, yes, we do. And he said, okay, let go of my hair. I'm coming. And we'll go. So they go and see Kassapa. Gatikara greets Kassapa with great respect and honour. And Jyotipala greets him quite casually, politely but casually, as an equal. And Gatikara is already a disciple. So he says, this Jyotipala is my close friend. Would you please give him a talk on the Dharma? Would you please teach him the Dharma? So the text says that Kassapa instructed, aroused, and gladdened Jyotipala with a talk on the Dharma. And Jyotipala was bowled over. Jyotipala was completely bowled over. He didn't want to go. But, wow, his eyes have been opened in quite a big way. And then and there, he decides to leave his privileged household life and to go forth into the homeless life. So he asks to join the Buddha's order of disciples, Kassapa's order of disciples, right then and there. But he's a bit puzzled. He says to Gatikara, well, look, this is wonderful. I'm going to leave my household life and go and join the homeless disciples of Kassapa. Why don't you? Why don't you? And Gatikara says, I can't. I've got 2 aged and ill parents to look after. I need to look after them. I cannot go off wandering after Kassapa. So shortly after this, Kassapa, on his wanderings, leaves the town where Gatikara and Jyotipala were staying, and Jyotipala presumably follows him. And he goes off to the capital city, the royal city, the residence where the king lives. And there, Kassapa and his disciples are received with great honour by the king. And the king has a fabulous meal prepared for Kassapa and his followers. I quite like the detail. It says there was various rices. There was dry yellow rice. There were various curries with black grains removed. And various condiments and pickles. Things haven't changed much, have they? Sounds like down the road. And then the king serves Kassapa and his followers with his own hands. So the king is doing great honour to Kassapa and his disciples, serves them with his own hands. And when Kassapa and his disciples have eaten, the king, who's called Kiki, doesn't sound very king-like, does it? It's called Kiki, anyway. He says to the Buddha, during the rainy season retreat, would you please, you can stay in my royal park. You can stay in my royal park, and every day you will eat food like I've just had prepared for you. You'll be treated wonderfully. So the rainy season retreat, I think we've mentioned this before, every year in India it rains like bilio for about 3 months in the summer. And typically the wanderers would stop wandering around and they would stay in shelters somewhere. And they'd stay in one place for that period and do a retreat. So the king is saying, you can stay in my royal park for the 3 months of the rainy season retreat and you'll be treated magnificently. You're going to have loads of curries and pickles. But Kassapa says, well, I can't. I've already accepted an invitation to stay somewhere else during the rainy season retreat. And the king says, oh, why ever not? Look, I'm the king. Who is more important than me? Who's more honourable than me? And who's going to give you better curry? Who can afford to feed you like I'm going to feed you? Why are you turning down my offer? And Kassapa says, well, I'm afraid there is someone more worthy of honour than you, and that is Gatikara the potter. He goes into a rave about Gatikara the potter. He says Gatikara the potter practices the 5 precepts. He runs through them each one by one as to how he practices the 5 precepts. He has great shraddha. He is given to conduct that is comely and pleasing to the noble and holy beings. He understands the Dharma and he's got no doubts about it. He lives a simple life and he supports his old parents. And he then goes on to make much of Gatikara's generosity. That's what he really spends quite a lot of time talking about, Gatikara's generosity and his spirit of service, the way he serves the Buddhist community. His service to the Sangha. And he ends up by saying he is freed from the fetters of the world. He has insight. He will achieve complete enlightenment, nirvana, at the ending of his life. So there's a clear message here, isn't there? There's a clear message, which is that, well, you can practice as a householder disciple and be more worthy than a king. You can follow the path right to the end as in a household situation. But not, in this case, just a normal, conventional household life, okay? Gatikara is a very dedicated practitioner, and he's not just living your normal, middle-class, comfortable existence. Gatikara lives a life of generosity and service. A very simple life. He's simplified his life to allow him to do that. And this spirit of service is what, if you like, unites the monks and the nuns on the one hand and the householder followers on the other, the effective household disciples. That's what they have in common. The monks and the nuns are told by the Buddha, you practice for the welfare of the many. You practice for the welfare of the many. And the Buddha is not averse to telling his disciples off if he doesn't think they're practicing for the welfare of the many. If they're not practicing in that way, he's in many places in the Pali Canon, he tells them, you're wasting the alms food of the countryside. You're wasting the alms food of the countryside. So people are feeding the monks. You're supposed to be doing something in return. And you're not. They're benefiting you, you should be benefiting them. There's a symbiosis here. There's a partnership between the householder disciples and the monks and nuns. They're partners in a common project to elevate the spiritual level of humanity. They're partners in a common project to help the evolution of consciousness on this planet, and they do different aspects of that. The householders need the monks and nuns. They need people who can do it full time. They need that radical edge, or they would probably become like the Church of England. That was a joke, thank you. They need people who are free. They need people who are free to teach and give themselves full time, to advise, to pass on the teaching, and to provide guidance with no worldly agenda whatsoever. There's nothing in it for them. They're completely beyond worldly considerations. They need that. The householders need that. And the monks and nuns, they need the householders. They need to get fed, among other things. They need to eat. They need to survive. They need a footing in society. They need a footing in society. They need dharma. And we're in a very, we're a completely different situation in some ways, but in some ways it's a very similar situation. We need some people to devote themselves full time to the Dharma and to service of the Sangha. We need that in Triratna. If we don't, we become the Church of England. And who wants that? So people will hear us encouraging that. They will hear us encouraging that. They will hear us encouraging people to devote themselves full time. This doesn't mean that we're saying you can't practice otherwise. But it does mean that without people practicing that way, we're goners, basically. Also there's a bit of a sting in the tail to the sutta. So the sting in the tail is that at the very last paragraph, the Buddha says, and that Jotipala who had to get dragged by the hair, that was me. There might be a hint here that great as Gatikara was, great as his achievement was, the Buddha's was greater because he chose a life of greater freedom. There may be a little bit of a hint of that in there, although maybe I've added that myself. There's a sort of balance of that sutta that it's immediately followed in the Majjhima Nikaya by a sutta about somebody called Ratapala. So the Buddha comes to a town in the Kuru country, the country of the Kuru clan, called Talakotita, something like that. And he gives a Dharma talk, as he does. He gives a Dharma talk. And among the audience there is one Ratnapala, who is the son of a noble family of the Kurus. And Ratnapala hears this Dharma talk, and we're told the thought arises in his mind, however I understand this Dharma talk, it is not easy for one who inhabits a house and lives a normal worldly life to follow the good life completely. It's not easy for one who inhabits a house and lives a normal worldly life to follow the good life completely. Perhaps I should cut off my hair, don the yellow robe, and go forth from home into homelessness. So he goes to the Buddha and he says, I'd like to go forth, I'd like to go forth, I'd like to join your followers and leave home and go forth and join your order. And the Buddha says, well, do you have your parents' permission? And Ratapala says, well, no, I don't. And the Buddha said, well, you need to get your parents' permission before I can possibly ordain you. So Ratapala goes to see his parents. He goes to see his parents and he asks them, I'd like to go forth, I'd like to join the Buddha's following. And his parents say, you are our only son. You've led a sheltered life. You know nothing of suffering and hardship. You wouldn't like it. Come, eat, drink, and amuse yourself. It would be a loss to us if you were to go forth. Eat, drink, and amuse yourself. We do not give our permission. So as always happens in the Pali Canon, there's a lovely sort of ritual goes on. He has to ask again, and they refuse. And he asks again, and they refuse. They always ask 3 times. And when he's refused the 3rd time, he lays down on the ground. He lays down on the ground and he says, I'm not getting up. I'm not eating and I'm not drinking unless you let me go. I'll die here rather than if you don't let me go. So the parents are a bit puzzled by this, so they ask some of their friends to go and talk to the lad. Go and talk to the lad. You know, tell him he's got a good life here. Talk to him. Tell him he shouldn't do this. So the friends go and make the same request, and he gives the same answer. Ratapala gives the same answer. No, I'm not moving. I'm not moving unless I can go. So eventually the friends, and actually Ratapala's getting quite ill. He's getting sort of frail and thin and whatnot. And eventually the friends go to the parents and say, look, he's a rich lad. He's not going to like it. You know, I mean, he's a rich boy. He's going to come back, isn't he? He's not going to like it. He's going to come back. It'll be all right. And if you don't let him go, he'll die. So let him go. He'll be back. Be all right. So, okay. I tell him he can go. So Ratapala recovers his strength and off he goes to see the Buddha. And he practices and he practices and he practices really hard. And we're told that before long he reached that matchless consummation of the good life, realized in this life his own gnosis, saw directly the nature of reality. So having become enlightened, he goes back to the Buddha and he says, I'd really like to go and visit my parents, actually. I'd really like to go and visit my parents. They were distraught when I left. I'd like to go back and see them. So he goes back to see his parents, and his father sees him coming in the distance with his begging bowl and starts shouting and abusing at him. You know, you lot, you bloody lot, you caused our son to go forth and leave us. Because of you. So, and then the father storms off inside. So it's a nice welcome for Ratapala. But a slave woman sort of sidles out and says, here, have some of this. Gives him some leftovers in his bowl. And as he's eating the leftovers, she recognises him. And so she goes indoors and she says to the mother, it's Ratapala, he's come back. And the mother says, if that's true, you are a freed woman. So they go out and they see him, it's Ratapala. They go and tell the father, it's Ratapala. So they invite him to a meal the next day. He refuses to stay in the house that night. I think he's a bit put off by his welcome. They invite him to a meal next night. And again, you get the fabulous array. You get the different rices. You get the different, it's like dinner down at the, whatever it's called. What's it called? Rajput. But as they're eating, the father unveils, he draws this cloth aside, and it's like a cloth. It reveals a massive pile of gold and jewels and money. And he says, all this could be yours. All this could be yours. Leave the training and return to the worldly life. Think of the life you could live. And Ratapala says, well, if you want my advice, you should load all that gold and all those jewels and all that money in a wagon, and you should drive it full pelt into the middle of the Ganges. Because for you, it will just be, you've got quite enough, and it will just be a source of grief, pain, distress, and trouble. Okay. So that's his interaction with his parents. He's pretty much turning his back on his parents' lifestyle and giving them a bit of advice. But he becomes a figure of great honour, so the king himself again prepares a meal for Ratapala. And the king is puzzled. The king says that there are 4 reasons why I can think of why somebody would would renounce the worldly life. I can only think of 3 reasons. Old age, they can't enjoy it anymore. Illness, so they can't enjoy it anymore. They lose their possessions, so they have to. Or they lose their family, so they have to as well. But you're young, you're strong, you're handsome, you're clever, you could be rich. Why? Why have you left the worldly life? Why have you left the worldly life? None of those apply to you. And so what Ratapala, one of the things, he starts out by replying, this transient world is always vanishing. There is no shelter or protection in this world. One can own nothing in this world. This world is in want. It is a slave to craving. That is why I have gone forth. So the king asks him a few questions. He says, what do you mean it's vanishing? What do you mean it's constantly vanishing? He says, well, what were you like at 25? And the king says, well, I was really strong. Nobody could beat me. I had strong arms, strong legs, black, thick hair, handsome. Women used to sort of lay at my feet. He didn't say that, actually. But he might have done. Anyway, and he says, well, what are you like now? And he says, well, my arms and legs are really skinny. I sort of stumble around. I'm ill all the time. I'm 80. He says, well, the world is constantly vanishing. That's what I'm telling you. Well, what do you mean there's no shelter? No protection? He says, well, do you have any chronic illnesses? And the king, interestingly, says, yes, I have a chronic wind illness. I think that meant something different, actually. I have a chronic wind illness. And he said, well, can your friends or relations give you any protection against this chronic wind illness? And he says, well, no, they can't, actually. I just have to bear it alone. No protection. He said, do you have lots of gold? He said, yeah, I have lots of gold. He said, well, what's going to happen to it? You're 80. What's going to happen to it soon? Well, other people are going to spend it. So there's nothing you can own in this world. What about, you said this world is is slave to craving. What do you mean by that? Ratapala says, well, if have you got enough? Are you reasonably prosperous at the moment? He said, yeah, we're a prosperous country. I'm a prosperous king and we've got loads of gold. So, well, if you heard about another prosperous country that was completely undefended, if somebody came and said, look, that next kingdom, they've got no army, they're completely independent, and they've got loads of stuff, what would you do? He said, I'd invade them. He said, well, I told you, slave to craving. You've got enough, you want more. Slave to craving. So, basically what I think Ratapala is saying is, well, A, the worldly life is not going to give you satisfaction, but B, that the life of a Buddhist is about something beyond the worldly life. It's about something beyond, there's something deeply unsatisfactory about conditioned existence. And what we're practicing is about something that's beyond that. It's not just about making a comfortable nest in samsara. His parents sort of try and get him to think about making a comfortable nest in samsara. So they at one point say, well, you can have all this gold, you could spend it on good works, and you could, you make life very, very nice. It's not just about making a comfortable nest in samsara. It is really about something different. It's about something beyond. It's about something much more radical. And I think that's the point he's saying, and that is best served by quite a radical lifestyle change. So I'd like to bring out just a few points from these two suttas. And the first point is, if we have a responsibility, of course, if we have responsibility, aged parents, kids, whatever, of course we can lead an effective spiritual life as a householder, quote unquote, with worldly responsibilities. But to make it an effective spiritual life, there needs to be a strong element of dana and service in it. That unites all types of spiritual life. You need a strong element of dana and service. Otherwise, it's just about yourself, and being just about ourselves is precisely what the Buddha says we need to go beyond. So we can live that way, but if we don't have responsibility and we're up to the challenge, why would we want to live a normal worldly life? I suppose that's a second point. If we've really taken on the Buddha's teaching, happiness comes from inside. It's not going to come from wealth. It's not going to come from what we own. It's not going to come from transient pleasures, what we consume. And we'll have more time and energy to devote to practice. We'll have more time and energy we can devote to service and altruism. We may well do more good. Why would we choose to live, if we really take that on board, why would we choose to live a normal conventional life rather than a more radical one? If we stay in the life we have been leading, if we get into the Dharma and stay in the life we have been leading, there are all sorts of forces that will tend to keep us as we are. We're very much part of our environment, and if we don't change our environment in some way, we will tend to be all sorts of forces to keep us as we are. But if we can change our circumstances, which is what this going forth is about, and especially if we can change the people we're surrounded by, because we're very, very influenced by the people we're surrounded by, then we free ourselves from the inertia of the past. And we are freed up to develop, to become something different in the future, to grow and change. So there's a real value in going forth, in making changes, in leaving the old situations behind. If we do have responsibility and we can't make a big change like that, we still need to do it in a small way. I mean, the way to do that is to go on retreat. If we want to be serious Buddhist practitioners, we have to go on retreat at times. We have to get away from our normal life and devote a weekend, maybe at start, a week, 2 weeks, building up to living a much a much more sort of full-on Dharma life, because that's where we really make progress. So yeah, renunciation. We talk about renunciation, really uncomfortable word in the West, isn't it? Renunciation. It's not an end in itself. It's not an end in itself. Sometimes there can be a sort of puritanical streak that thinks it's an end in itself. But it frees us from entanglements. It gives us more time and energy to devote to the spiritual life in all its aspects. It gives us more mental space, freedom from worldly concerns. Many of us will have experienced that even on a retreat, even on a week or a 2-week retreat. And many of us will know that that freedom of mind, where we're not having to worry about worldly concerns, can be literally blissful. Literally blissful. We may well experience moments, even more than moments, of bliss, which can really become our general experience. If we want to be happy, we need to do that. We need to free ourselves up. At least spend some time completely free from worrying about worldly things. But at the same time, we need to be realistic, okay? We need to be realistic about ourselves. We've all got really strong, what are called samskaras. We've got quite strong sort of habit energies. So perhaps we need to approach things a bit gradually. People in the Buddhist time, many people seem to have just, okay, I'll cut off my hair and I'll beg. I'll eat what's in my bowl, I'll sleep under a tree. I think if most of us did that, even if the weather improved significantly, we'd probably be home again soon, you know. I mean, there was something about I don't know whether it was the presence of the Buddha or the time that people were just much more whole in themselves. I don't know what it was. But most of us we'd probably bounce back and never meditate again, you know, go and get jobs in the city, I don't know. We just bounce out of that. So because we've got these samskaras, we need to sort of approach things a little bit cautiously. If renouncing our old worldly sources of pleasure and satisfaction is just going to make us unhappy and sour, and you can sometimes see that in people, it won't be serving a useful spiritual purpose. So we have to go at a pace that actually works for us. It's about giving ourselves a more spacious mind, not about being pure or being self-righteous or anything like that. It's about a mind that's more spacious and less fettered by worldly concerns. So we do need to sort of take ourselves and our samskaras into account. And I think that's the way we try to approach it within Triratna. We try to move in the direction of a simpler life. We say that every time we chant the precepts, with stillness, simplicity and contentment. We want to move towards a simpler life. But we can't just sort of suddenly cut off all our sources of pleasure and satisfaction. We need some pleasure in life. So what we're about is gradually developing more pleasure from spiritual activities, from friendship, from meditation, etc., etc. Gradually raising the level of where we get our pleasure from to coin a phrase, what we can eat, sleep, and have sex with, which is, eat, own, or have sex with. I think that's the usual sort of level of a lot of our pleasure to something a little bit more refined. So we're seeking to elevate our pleasures so that ultimately we get pleasure from the spiritual life. So we do need to sort of take it a little bit gradually. We're not about suddenly going and sleeping under a tree and begging for our food. But at the same time, I'd like to just end with the fact that as a movement, I said this about the Buddhist time, but as a movement, we need some people to be radical. We need some people to live a radically different lifestyle. We need to be subversive. Buddhists should be subversive. We're not the Church of England. We're not sort of trying to just promulgate the values of our society. We don't believe the same things that worldly society believes, not if we're Buddhists. We should be subverting that society because it makes people ill and unhappy, and because there's other ways of living that actually are much more human and much more fulfilling. So some people need to be radical, and so you will hear encouragement to be radical. And if you don't want to be radical, that doesn't mean you have to complain about it, but without the radical people, we won't be here.